Have you ever wondered if it's possible to live in sync with your cycle? Do you struggle with a negative mindset around your period? Are you wondering if it's possible to be feminist and anti-birth control? We're going to explore these questions and so much more in the Managing Your Fertility podcast, because this is about helping you live a whole and full life. I'm your host and guide, Bridget Busacker, joining you in this journey of exploration related to women's healthcare, feminism, and fertility awareness. Are you ready? Let's get started. Kelly, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get started and jumping into our conversation today, focusing on miscarriage, loss, infant loss, child loss, and most importantly, the ministry that you and your husband run, I'm going to give an introduction to our wonderful guest. So Kelly Breaux gave birth to a set of twins in 2005, a son Talon and a daughter Emma Grace. Talon died after 15 days, with Emma Grace joining her brother in heaven 3 years later. Ryan and Kelly were propelled onto a personal journey of both discovery and recovery after battling a decade of darkness in their marriage. By the grace of God, their marriage was saved. Through the sacraments of the Catholic Church, the Breaux found healing and restoration. Through personally experiencing the loss of a child and through their own suffering, the thirst of bringing those who suffer back to the light and to the Lord grew. Therefore, they looked to Mother Teresa, patroness of Red Bird Ministries, for passion and inspiration to serve those who are suffering, specifically through the loss of a child. In the gift of restoration, they felt called to help others navigate the pain and unexpected challenges that come from the loss of a child. And through their first divine vocation of parenthood, Red Bird Ministries was born. And something awesome is that Red Bird Ministries was named by Alatea as the top 10 ministries to know in 2020. So I'm just so excited, Kelly, to have you with us to be talking about your ministry, your book, your work, and just how this all started. So can you tell us a little bit more beyond this bio about your story?
Yeah, so absolutely. Thank you again for having me. This is such an important topic, and I think that the more we talk about it, the more that it's going to be brought to the light, and souls can be healed, and families can be saved. So again, thank you. So my husband and I were married in 2002 in the church, and of course, like Bridget said, we experienced child loss at a very young age. I always when I tell my story, I tell everyone, like in the context, that my faith was very immature at the age that we lost our children. And I guess because our marriage prep was not like on a solid foundation, we struggled really to know where actually to turn when this happened. Ron and I, we experienced a loss. I was 25 years old at the time. And so going through that without the help of the church, I felt very, very alone. And what I mean by that is that there was not any type of grief support in our parish nor in our diocese. So it took me to a place of looking for support in the secular aspect. And growing through that and going through that, one of the things that that helped me to uncover and discover was that most of my questions had to do with my faith. So when I was seeking restoration through the eyes of the secular world, it excluded all of my spirituality. Most of these questions were, why did this happen to me? Like, what have I done wrong? Why did God allow this? And those are big questions that I needed the help from my spiritual father. I think what happened, there was a time, I think about 100 years ago, I would say less than 100 years ago, when people actually mourned in public, or people actually knew that you were grieving. And it has gotten so far past that, where they hide behind doors to grieve. And not out of shame or embarrassment am I saying this, but just out of a reality of how far our world has come into the aspects of mourning and how we view mourning. And so all of that had an effect on the way that I viewed mourning. So going back into that time period after first Talon and then Emma passed away, I really isolated myself, and because my questions just were not being answered. And these questions, they were really big, and I think they were bigger than most people could answer, because um, we don't have some of those concluding answers to those big questions, but we do have a big church. And I think what I was looking for was help from the body of Christ, just to help me to journey through that healing and restoration with my faith. And I needed someone to help me. So it's kind of how Redbird came about after we lost Talon and Emma. It was really, I say God was probably tired of me hearing. He was probably tired of hearing me ask these big questions of why this support was not a part of the church. And he's really sent me on a mission to begin the work myself.
It is so beautiful, Kelly, and so hard too. And I think, I love the point that you make about mourning in public versus mourning in private. Um, it just gets me really thinking, like, it is true. We don't really see when people are suffering unless we volunteer that information. We're not wearing black. There aren't
Mhm.
certain social aspects that we're participating in or culturally that we're doing, at least in America. So that you're really in this space, like, unless you're putting it out on social media or you're sharing within your community or sharing with your friends, you're really looking for other people to hold you up. And I love to have a little bit more of a conversation, because I know we talked about this in the Instagram live as well. You know, just seeing those gaps in the church. And really, I mean, I think from some of these gaps is really where your ministry stems from. So maybe we can kind of segue into that. But I think, just speaking a little bit more, not to blame parishes, not to blame pastors, but I think the conversations that were lacking, I mean, you felt so personally. I know I felt personally as well in the space of having a miscarriage myself, and just that struggle to say, where do I go? What am I supposed to do? From questions of blessings and burials and processing and that emotional support. Um, what do you see as being needed in that space of the church?
Yes,
And what is Red Bird Ministries to help answer some of those struggles?
absolutely. I can remember the first time that our pastor, after we started Redbird, he called me and he said, Kelly, we have a 16-week loss. He was like, what can we help this family with? And, a lot of the times that, we look to the state or what is accepted by society to know what to do. Um, and there really wasn't, because the state doesn't issue a death certificate in an early loss before 20 weeks. And so what I advised our priest to do was to contact the funeral home and to see if there was a way that we could give honor and dignity to that child, and father could perform an actual burial, and he was able to do that. But I think some of those, especially in our state, before 20 weeks, there's really nothing that the state offers. Not until 2015 was a law passed in Louisiana that a family could ask for the remains of their child. It's still not widely known. So you will often find families very afraid when they are going through the miscarriage process to even go to the hospital, because they are so afraid that they're not going to be able to receive the remains of their child back to give that child a proper burial. So it's still, there's so much education that's surrounding loss before 20 weeks that really needs to happen. And unfortunately, they're not teaching this in seminary. And so, our priest, Father McIntyre, I think he's been a priest almost 10 years, still did not, I guess, have an answer for this family, and was seeking out support. And thankfully that we are in that parish, that we were able to help that family. And so that's one thing that we are really trying to do is to give dignity to the life of the child before 20 weeks. I think laws protect um, beyond 20 weeks, but before that, there really isn't many laws that in our country that are valuing life. I think that's one big step. And if our government is not taking a step to do that, then it's up to us, the laity, um, to step up and to do things. I know the reason why that law was passed in 2015 in our state was because a very faithful couple experienced a loss, and the hospital denied them the remains of their child. And so um, they went to the diocese, and the diocese got them in contact with a pro-life coordinator, and they advocated for life on that aspect. So I think I think a lot has to change, both in the way that the secular world views life, but also as the faithful. I have many people who will tell me, Kelly, I lost a child before 20 weeks too. And, the first thing I tell them is, I'm so sorry. And what most of them say next, I think, is a huge problem is they'll tell me, oh, it's okay, I was only 5 or 6 weeks. And what we don't realize is that as long as the faithful are speaking these words and not giving the dignity to that child, we will never have a stance on abortion. We are basically saying the same thing as the pro-choice side says, is that life does not have value until the laws prevail, which is typically at 20 weeks when we can actually take the child home and bury the child. So I think it's up to us as to correct the wrongs of the world and to speak the truth in every chance that we get, so that as the faithful community, that we can start to educate people on, like, life begins at conception, and we have to give honor and dignity to that child, and that's the only way that we will ever be able to have a stance on abortion and be able to give the honor and the dignity to life that it deserves.
I really like your point about how we are the church. We have a role in this too, that it's not just to say, oh, it's on the Pope, it's on the bishops, it's on the priests, although that education is good and to see that top down, but it's also bottom up. And, it's not just on governmental laws, although they're very helpful, and working together to say, okay, where do we come in to have an active role in this space? In a space that's already really hard, but I think, like you said, when an individual says, oh, I was only this far along, there's somewhat of that separation from that loss, from that grief. But what is that really, on a personal level, there's a lot going on there. But on a much larger scale, it is saying, okay, this life doesn't really matter until a certain point. When, if we as Catholics truly believe in the dignity of human life, womb to tomb, we have to honor and recognize every loss, because it is a loss of a human life. I know that was my own personal struggle in miscarriage, to think, oh, I was only X amount of weeks. And I knew that wasn't right. It was like, well, no, but this is real to me. I don't need to respond in this way for someone else. Like, what, this is a person. I lost a person of my family. I
Mhm.
didn't meet them. I didn't see their face, but that was still a person. And I know, I think, and we'll touch on this in a little bit too. I mean, stats for miscarriage are much higher than I think we've seen before, but I think some of that stems from the fact that we're talking about it more. We're trying to find ways to talk about it more, to honor the space of loss. I know New Zealand just came out with a law to recognize parental leave for individuals who have lost a child through miscarriage. And while, we could get into their stances on abortion, there's something to be said there, like, okay, well, now you're recognizing life here. And can we start to see those changes and that turnover, not only in laws, but in our hearts too, which I think is such a point that you make. It's a really good point. So what is Red Bird Ministries? I mean, you guys are really coming in just an amazing way to serve men and women and couples in the space of grieving and loss. So can you just tell us everything about your ministry and what it is you offer?
Yes, absolutely. So our first intention was to serve the families in our diocese in Lafayette. And one of the first things that Father Halpin at our diocese gave me to do, he gave me homework. He was like, go and see what other dioceses and parishes are doing. And I was like, really? I don't want to do this research. I just want to help people. But what he did for me was he empowered me to go out and to actually like see the need and the lack. So this is not something that was just local to me. As I started to uncover and discover, like, this was not a Diocese of Lafayette issue. This was a church issue, that we are not meeting the needs of our families of loss. And when I talk about grief support, because we are a pro-life, pro-family grief support ministry, so that means that we believe in all the teachings of the church, even the hard ones, which is, of course, no contraception, sterilization, and helping our families to, even though, experiencing loss is traumatic, and the fear of loss for our family after loss is real and valid, we do not give permission or justify that as a reason to contracept and sterilize. So we help our families through the complexity of loss so that they can embrace life in the fullest, because we know the consequences of sterilization and contraception after loss is guilt, shame, embarrassment, and oftentimes, our families are weeping on my sofa as my arms are wrapped around them, because when they made a decision out of fear, it prevented them from having more children. So we started out with just this idea that we were going to serve the families. We're sent on mission to figure out how we could do that. And as I started to uncover nothing, the first year of the ministry, what I did was just started to create things and make them Catholic. So as I was researching, I would find good articles that had a lot of great points and ways to help families, but it just lacked the spirituality and the teachings of the church. And so what I did was I would just piece together puzzle pieces of different materials, and created some really powerful programs. So right now, currently, so how Red Bird has developed over the last 3 years is we do serve families in our diocese, but we are beginning to develop other chapters in the church so that they can duplicate our efforts. And our hope is to be the touch point of evangelization to the church for grief support and child loss. The way that we're doing it is creating resources in basically like a boxed approach, if you think about it, in that aspect of grief support, to where that we can package together powerful resources so that other parts of the country, other church chapters, diocesan chapters, or even parishes, we call them our flocks, can go and just serve hearts. That the time that was it was taking our team to be able to create these resources just left me feeling like so frustrated, because I was like, I don't have time to do the thing that I need to do, which is, be in front of these families, loving them, because all my attention was, turning towards the content creation and the graphic design. And when you start hiring a team, then it's like managing a team and, paying taxes and payroll and stuff like that. So our hearts just really burn and desire to fill this need and this gap that we know that our church desperately needs to fill, because, what people do is when they're bringing themselves through Red Bird, what is uncovered is that, the grief is like the lane that they're traveling on, but you have all of these little side roads that come to that lane and that get brought on their journey, which is past hurts, past wounds, childhood traumas they might have experienced. I know mine was my parents were divorced. So that got brought into my grief. And this father wound got brought into my grief that was revealed through my grief, that reason why that I couldn't trust God was because I had this father wound that needed to be healed. And so the way that we are doing this is on a peer-to-peer support. So everyone who comes into the ministry and who walks with another family is a family of loss. And we do this for one big reason. It's because communication breakdown happens when there's not shared experiences. St. John of the Cross talks about this into the Sin of Mount Carmel when he describes the concept of explaining color to a blind person in the aspects of faith. And there's an abridged version that I was reading one day, and it was some meditations on this concept. And Father, I think it's Mark Foley, I think is his last name. He explains the breakdown in communication and the aspects of exactly what St. John of the Cross said about explaining color to a blind person and the aspect of suffering. And he says intellectually it makes sense, but you can experience, when you're going through it and trying to explain it, you clearly understand that the person that you're communicating with does not understand what you're going through. So there's no amount of words that can properly articulate to someone who has not suffered what that suffering feels like, what they're going through, their struggles, like these thoughts, these emotions that are coming to them from someone who has not experienced that same type of loss. So it's very important. So what we do, we call our little flocks, our little groups of families, our flocks. And so we bring them into our nest. And so we bring them into our nest, we give them rest. They find a place where they belong. And we, sit with them, hear their story, and then we find out exactly what they need. And so typically you'll see, like a lot of times, like families will need spiritual direction. And so then we point them to a spiritual director, either a lay spiritual director or their priests, or they might have some missing sacraments. So we help families whose marriages haven't been blessed to find, to seek convalidation. We have families that we help to start their, I'm losing my train of thought, to start an annulment process. I couldn't think of the word. Sorry, guys. So we'll help them to do that. Or it might be that they need to go through our CIA and they need confirmation, or just whatever that looks like. Our primary goal is to bring the people back, our families back into full communion with God. Because the reality is that after you lose a child, your desire for heaven becomes it becomes a primary focus of a family. You want to get to heaven because your child's in heaven, but sometimes it's disordered. And so it's like that pearl of great price. We find a pearl and, we want to sell everything to obtain that pearl. But what we don't often remember is that the merchant in the story is actually Jesus. He's pursuing us. He wants us back into full communion with him. And so we help our families to get back into full communion with God by directing them and pointing them where they need to go. So we look at it holistically. So that's the whole person. Sometimes it's pointing our families towards counseling. So we help them to find a vetted Catholic counselor, because it does make a difference in your healing if you are going to a counselor that actually shares the same beliefs. Most often we don't consider that if we are not seeking a Catholic counselor, that they do not focus on the sacrament of that person's marriage. We've heard stories from families who basically, their counselor has given them permission to get divorced when they're going through a trauma like this. And what they really need is actually they need to be yoked together. And it's difficult because women and men, they grieve so differently. Like women typically, and I'm not saying all men and all women do this. What I'm saying is typically more that does than doesn't. Women tend to emote, externally, and men tend to regress and hold their grief inside. Or what they'll do is they'll physically show their grief. So it can come out in anger, frustration, or in work. So sometimes they'll immerse themselves in work, which is really an unhealthy way of grieving. Typically, you'll see someone after loss who will say, I'm staying busy. And while to some degree or another, that really is, it is productive and it is healthy, anything in moderation is good. When it becomes, disordered and when you're, in gluttony of that or sloth of that, it really becomes a vice against the family and it's more harmful than good. And so we try to help our families to identify some of these vices and some of these unhealthy grieving patterns, and then, and walk with them. I firmly believe that virtue is caught, it's not taught. To be able to model virtue, it has to first be modeled towards us. And so that's what we seek. And, when we help and ask our companion couples, we seek couples who are modeling virtue and witnessing the power of Christ in their story so that they can attract families who have experienced traumatic experiences and loss, to lead them back to Christ.
This is all so beautiful. I just reiterating what you had said earlier, this is about the whole person. I mean, you are not just looking at an aspect of a particular story, you're looking at the whole story and just seeing, okay, where are the wounds coming up? I loved the visual that you created of the lane of grief, but then there are these other side roads that come into play and impact the story, impact our journey and our experience with that. And just how beautiful it is that you're really walking with people and you're looking to say, okay, what's missing sacramentally, the spiritual, and then you have, the physical, the psychological, just everything merging together so beautifully to really be able to get at the heart of what's going on and to dig deeper, because I think it's the temptation is to say, I want to stay on the surface, just get me through. Just get me through. And
Yes.
really that journey that you're bringing individuals on to say, let's go a little deeper. I mean, just the different aspects of wounds that can come up to bring healing into those spaces too is just incredible. But it's not, I mean, I think, someone listening might hear this and go, well, that sounds absolutely daunting, but you're not alone. And I think that's the beauty of the work that you're doing, and just
Yeah.
really making sure someone knows they're not alone. And when you're struggling and it's hard and you don't know and you can't see the light, that this is a space to help you bring that light, to remind you Christ is the light in the tunnel. You don't have to wait until the absolute end. Like, there are resources available and tangible ways that you don't just have to like pray harder. Because I think that's something, and maybe you can speak to this a little too, that I think sometimes we are tempted to do as Catholics, is just, I just need to pray harder. And just the aspects that you're bringing up is, well, yes, there is prayer, there are the sacraments to participate in, but there's also the reality that you may need a Catholic therapist. You may need to be doing more intentional work in your marriage or in the grieving process to really uncover and see what's going on. Um, do you find that individuals, I don't know, is there like a sense of relief in knowing, okay, it's not just me having to pray harder, or I'm praying wrong when you're walking with people? Like, do you find that that's sometimes that dominant narrative in the space of your work?
Yeah, I think typically all our families pretty much say the same thing. Like there's a fear, an initial fear to come. Like, and I know this is probably speaking to multiple different types of wounds and traumas, but the fear that I'm going to be misunderstood, no one's going to understand what I'm going through, that I'm the only one that is experiencing this. I'm the only one that's having these thoughts. I mean, that is a reality of what we actually experience. I can remember um, thinking if people would really know what is going through my head, they would think I was crazy. Like they would have to give me medicine. But to actually say that in such a safe space with people who have experienced, I can honestly say, like, if you're thinking it, I've probably thought it too. And for me, it's taken me a while to get to a place where I can honestly say these things out loud. But that's why I share my story so openly and share some of the most, sacred parts of my grief that just are so humiliating and embarrassing when you say them out loud, is because I know what it's like to stay in that and to feel that feeling of being totally out of control. Like I prided myself in being this strong woman who, we got married, we were starting a life, like life was beginning. And then all of a sudden, I had no control over anything in my life, my emotions, my thoughts. And that is such a scary place to be. Um, and I couldn't understand how to get a hold of all that. And so, like, this idea that, yeah, you're alone in this and that no one understands, that's a tactic of the enemy, that he wants to keep us in that isolation so that we don't actually find healing. Like, I always tell everybody, I do not want families to survive loss. That is what the world teaches. Get back to normal, business as usual. What we want at Red Bird is for you to thrive, for you to find glory in your story, because there is power in the sacraments. There is healing. And that's not just something, it's not just this lofty idea. And it's not just something I'm saying, like, yes, theology teaches it, but I actually experienced it firsthand and then had to go back and study, like, what the heck happened to me, Lord? And God revealed, like, this greater story of, like, there's actually teaching to what happened to you. But I think for me, Bridget, like, I'm so stubborn. And I think that is one of the reasons why God gave me this mission, is because I feel sometimes like I'm Mother Teresa. Like, if you don't send the ambulance, I'm going to go and take it. Like, like, it's going to happen. Like God gave this, this greater desire. Like, I feel like uh, like this war is raged in my heart of love, that to serve and to help families. But that stubbornness also was a vice that God used to bring me to virtue. So he used my stubbornness, he used my anger, to project my heart. He used the things that um, were not healthy to help me to understand. I'm not a person that can just accept things. I think I've always been, it's shameful to say, but the child who was disobedient until you showed them to prove them. So, like, even when people would say, like, pray, like, that's easy for you to say, like, you haven't lost a child. Like, so it took actually someone to invite me back to my faith who had experienced loss. That was the only way my hard head would actually listen to God's voice as he was sending all these people along the way for help. It actually took someone who had experienced the tragedy of losing her child at 10 years old when a drunk driver hit her and her daughter leaving a concert, to ask me to come back to my faith. And she did it when she asked me to make my Cursillo. So absolutely 100%. Like, I think there's so much fear, that's just so much fear and embarrassment and shame and stigma behind actually seeking support. But I think when you get to talking with other women or even men, other families of loss, you will realize that we all say the same things. We all have the same pains. We all have a long for our children again. We all ask the same questions.
Kelly, you're just amazing. I mean, really, truly, this is just incredible. Just the way you're sharing just the different aspects of your journey. And I know people are going to resonate with this. I mean, I know I am in just these spaces that you're talking about with, how your own conversion back to the church, just how different people touched your life at different points, but it really was someone also going through that loss, and just how powerful it is for us, I think, to be open, to be vulnerable. As we were talking about earlier, that we don't always show our grief, but for the woman who went through loss and was willing to put her own heart out there to connect with yours, is so powerful. And just the beauty in that vulnerability, that when we share, there's just so much power in having that connection with others and helping them on their own journey. I know we decided to share about our own miscarriage in our Christmas card, and when I had given it to coworkers, I had some coworkers come up to me and they said, hey, I had a loss too. And these were some women in their 50s and their 60s, and they just started talking about it. And I was just really honored by that, but also amazed, like, wow, because I was like
Mhm.
willing to say this, because there was part of me that, no, I don't need to. It's just my close friends who know, and that's fine. But I thought, okay, but if I want to see a change in this space, right? If I want to be met in my own grief, but also I want to be better about meeting others in their grief, we have to sometimes put ourselves out there. And I mean,
Yes.
I'm just seeing, like, for you and your husband, you know, you've developed and created Red Bird Ministries through the grace of God, through his work and through the ways he's worked on your heart, to meet so many people in this space and to really walk with them, and just how beautiful that is, that it's proliferated into an incredible ministry. And just, I think, for this call to all of us in the spaces where we've experienced loss or grief, to re-examine and say, okay, God, how can you use me? How where do you need me to serve? Where do you need me to love? And sometimes I think when we're in the hard work of healing, and it never necessarily ends, but we're in those early stages where it's really hard. Sometimes it is just focusing and saying, okay, Lord, I need to be rebuilt. I need you in this foundational work because things are amok. But in that space, as we grow, as we change, as we see the ways in which God's revealing his glory, how are we called to go back out into the vineyard and say, okay, how can I love? How can I serve? And I love what you said, find glory in your story. I think that's just
Yes.
so awesome, because it's just it's not the numbing out. It's not saying just coast, get through it, push hard, keep going, keep moving. Don't let anybody see you're tough, you're strong. Like, okay, yeah, you're tough, you're strong, but there is glory in the story, in your story, and to lean into that in such a holistic way has so much more power and strength than just powering through all the time. And you started to touch on this a little bit. You know, how are we how can we help women who are in this space, and men who are struggling, what we can do to help support individuals? Because, like you said, you had a friend open up to you, and I'm talking a little bit about that. What are some other practical, tangible ways to receive someone suffering and to serve them, to love them in their suffering, because instead of just saying, oh, you'll get through it, or like, well, God's going to provide, don't worry. I mean, that can feel like a slap in the face, frankly, to have those little phrases said when it's like, I know what you're trying to get at, but I'm hurting.
Mhm.
So what would you recommend? What are some practical ways that we can love people around us who we see are struggling with loss?
Yeah, so I think the biggest misconception after someone experiences a loss is that we need to give them space. Um, where that is, there is an aspect of that, and I'm not saying that does not need to happen, but I have so many families that have said, people were just afraid to talk to me. I've had families who said that, they were at the grocery store and, people have admitted that they didn't know what to say. And so they turned around and left. I mean, that's heartbreaking. I think our love is prayer, but our love is also action. So I wrote down a couple of things that I thought have been the most heart touching moments after my loss. One, I had a friend who had experienced a loss at, I think she was 15 weeks pregnant, and she actually had to deliver the baby at the hospital. And that really touched her heart after that. And so she had made a conscientious effort after every friend who she had experienced to invite them to do something. And so after we lost Emma, my friend Heather, she called me and she said, "Hey, I really want to take you somewhere. Would you want to come?" It was like painting with a twist. So we went to paint and had a glass of wine. And she was the first friend who was not afraid after Emma died to call me and invite me to do something. And I needed that. I needed that connection with another mom of loss, to just to go and paint. And we didn't talk about our grief. We went paint and we had a glass of wine. So sometimes those little actions. Also, you can, if that's hard for you, or if you haven't experienced a loss, but you still want to love your friend through that, sending a card to the family and telling them how sorry that you are that they lost their baby. I also have done this where I actually set a reminder on my phone to go and to visit a friend on the due date of their baby. And so just popping in, you don't have to go with anything. You can bring something. I like to bring gifts, but just to let them know I'm here for you. I see you. I love you, and that you're not alone. We also have on our website what we call our healing boxes. And so you can go on our website if you don't live close to a friend, and you can send them a healing box. We have some items in our benefit boutique. You can actually send it to them, and we can write a little love note. There's also meal trains. I don't know any other mother who would ever deny someone to cook for their family. And so I think that's just a way to love another mother or another family, is by setting up a little meal train for them. Cooking is just one of those daily tasks that we have to do as as a family. And if it's one less thing that mama can have to worry about, that is an offering of love to her. I've had other families who said that there was a priest in their parish that would just bring them a rose. They would sign up after a loss, and their priest would bring them a rose. So just a little visit from their spiritual father. And another tidbit, which is super important, ask the father that how he is feeling. Make sure you check on the men in the family as well, because our fathers, they feel so left out. Sometimes I find that they don't feel worthy of receiving, these checkups, because it's their wife who actually physically experienced the loss. But the men are grieving too. That's their child that they lost to. So don't forget to check on our fathers.
Those are such great ideas. I really like those, and just how practical, tangible they are in different ways that we can love someone else who's struggling and going through loss. And I'm glad you mentioned with the men too, just because you had talked a little bit about that earlier, just how women and men grieve differently too, and just making sure we're checking in on both, and how good that is to do that. I know I had mentioned this a little bit earlier, and I want to circle back to it because I think there's a misconception that not many people experience a miscarriage or infant loss or child loss. And I think, especially when it comes to miscarriage, I mean, we see numbers like 1 in 3, 1 in 4. And I know some of that has to do with, women are more in tune with their bodies and their cycles, so they're much more aware of what's going on. But then I think there's also this element of sharing more, of opening up a little bit more around our grief and around our stories, and helping women to not feel alone. I see this a lot on social media, which is really beautiful, but I know it can't stay there in the feed, right? What
Yeah.
does it look like as far as stats go for loss, and especially for miscarriage? I mean, I think we don't realize I think how high it is, in that we can be in a room of 20 women, and there are probably a few women in there who experience loss of some kind.
Yeah.
Can you
So
just touch on
yeah.
that?
Yeah, so absolutely. So 1 in 3, 1 in 4. Some statistics say 1 in 3, some say 1 in 4 pregnancies end before the baby is born. So in the secular aspect, if you look at the country as a whole, we're looking at about 800,000 miscarriages that are recorded. So that's not to mention the ones that might have happened before they actually see the doctor before. I think typically it's like 8 weeks. So that number actually, I think, probably is more in the lines of 1 in 2, 1 in 3. I know both me and my sister, we're only two in our family, and both of us have experienced miscarriage. I think a lot of families can probably attest to that. We have some families that we serve who have multiple losses, 6. I have one mother that we've served that has had 10 miscarriages. So sometimes when a family is, struggling to conceive, like it's not just one, it's multiple. And I think each loss, it just, it compounds that grief. And, just when you're starting to get your feet back on the ground, it's happening again. So those losses are tremendous. So like when you think of grief support or child loss, a lot of times the misconception is that we just serve like new loss, and that's not true. We're serving families. One of our couples that came to us at one of our workshops, their baby had died 18 years previously, but they were still holding on to some being open, some openness to life, and we were able to help them through that. Stillbirth, and stillbirth is about 30,000 stillbirths a year. And then after birth up to a year, it's around the same amount, about 25 to 30,000 babies that are passing away. And that's just in the United States. That's not throughout the world. Which I'm saying that because when you look at our analytics from our website, we have been in communication with families from over 30 different countries. And that's within the last 7 months, which was mind-blowing to me, that we've had over 11,000 unique visitors from 30 different countries. So as we are looking through statistics just on the United States of America, we know, like, our church is universal. It's throughout the entire world. And so the impact of Red Bird has the potential to also serve the entire church.
Wow, that's incredible. And just how many different visitors you've had from all over the world. I mean, the beauty of, I think, this online space and an online website, and then, you have boots on the ground as well, but just these different avenues in which you can serve virtually and in person. It's just so impactful and incredible, so that individuals can really, it's not limited to where you live. You've broken beyond, just a community or a neighborhood or a state, and just to be able to serve in so many different capacities. I know I've shared your resource with friends. I've shared it with my doula, and I know that that's something that they really appreciate having and knowing. Especially my doula was really grateful, like, okay, good, I actually have something tangible as I
Mhm.
work with families, because it's something that's so needed. And when you're struggling to figure out, okay, is it a book? Is it a pamphlet? Just to have, really, you've got like the one-stop shop going on with your site, which is incredible, with your ministry. And I mentioned book because in addition to all of the work that you're doing, you also wrote a book.
I did. I wrote a biography of my journey. I kept going to our local Catholic bookstore over the course of many years, as things would happen, and I kept asking, is there a book on child loss that talks about healing? And every time I go, I was told no. And so I was like, you know what? I think that God is asking me to write my story. So my book is called Hiding in the Upper Room: How the Catholic Sacraments Helped Me to Heal from the Grief of Child Loss. So specifically, how the sacraments heal, like how tangibly, and how we can seek that healing, which is so important, because I think what people oftentimes think is that, you know, like my healing has to happen when I'm stopping crying, or I'm able to talk about it. And that's not necessarily what healing looks like. Healing looks like is when we can embrace joy and suffering together. There is times, even 15 years later, after our son passed away, where I'm find myself sitting, not planned, but sitting and looking at his pictures and longing to hold him again. So if you had to look at my story, I'm still crying and wanting my child in my arms. That pain will never leave. And we know that because that is what is that's what we find in heaven. Um, our mind and our heart are, I always tell this to my spiritual director, my mind and my heart, they're always in battle. Intellectually, it makes sense. Intellectually, I know what I'm supposed to be doing, but sometimes my heart, it struggles to catch up. And so I wrote this book specifically to other families who are struggling to seek support, who might be feeling so alone that no one understands, as basically a key to open their heart. So it's if you have, or if someone has experienced the loss of a child, I would give them this book. It's the first step, I think, to help a family to understand, one, what they might be experiencing, and to open their heart to begin to heal.
This is so great. And we're going to link to it as well, because I think, just like you said, it's that first step, and just exploring and seeing, okay, what's my next step? How do I do this? How do I navigate this space? And then what I love is that really your book is such a beautiful tie into your ministry, so that there are these tangible steps someone can take where they're not just, not to say other books where it offers practical, support, but to have a ministry to tie back to and to go to for even more support and more breadth of information. It's just so great. Kelly, I'm just so grateful for the work that you and your husband are doing, and everything that you and Ryan are accomplishing through the grace of God, through the work and your yes. I mean, really through all of the challenges and the struggles and the fire, and just to see this beautiful ministry coming through to support individuals to finding glory in their story. I'm loving that, because it's something that we all need to remember. We all need to remember. So we will definitely be linking to Red Bird Ministries, Kelly's book, any other resources that she would like us to share on here in the show notes, and just giving a little bit more background from this episode. But thank you so much, Kelly, for being on, for sharing. It's just been a blessing to be with you today.
Thank you so much. And before we go, I just want to let everyone know, Ryan and I have another book coming out. It's called Restoring Love, and we hope that it will hit our store. You can purchase on our website a pre-order, but we hope we'll have our tangible copies in May. It's a 33-day guide, consecration to the Holy Family, and it's modern day saints, which is St. Louis and St. Zélie, who we know have lost 4 children after birth, walking with Ron and I, modern day sinners towards healing and restoration. And so we've unpacked 33 questions, conversations that couples can have in the privacy of their home to help them to begin to heal as a couple.
Oh, that's so awesome. I'm so excited. This is great. This is the first time I'm hearing about it. So I'm really excited for this, and we will definitely link to that. And I will for sure be sharing, because that's so beautiful. Consecration to the Holy Family, and having Saints Louis and Zélie interceding as well. I mean, just how powerful. That's so great. I know I keep saying beautiful, powerful, but I mean, really, these are the words that are just encompassing, I think, this work that you're doing, and through this interview, just to hear the amazing ways that you're impacting so many lives and just really bringing people closer to the Lord, which is just such a gift. So thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure speaking with you today.
Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe, share with your friends, and help expand the conversation around women's health. If you'd like to learn more about fertility awareness, visit www.managingyourfertility.com for more information, resources, guides, and so much more.